The most wanted man on Earth was found because of something he never did. In nearly 10 years of hiding, he never once made a phone call. The largest manhunt in history chased signals, satellite intercepts, informants, prisoners in secret cells on 3 continents. Almost none of it worked. What finally worked was noticing a house on a dirt road outside a Pakistani hill town with no telephone line, no internet connection, and residents who burned their own rubbish instead of putting it out like everyone else. The compound sat about 2.5 miles northeast of Abbottabad, in a neighborhood of low walls and open courtyards. Its own walls rose between 12 and 18 feet, topped with barbed wire. The plot ran to roughly 38,000 square feet, several times the size of the houses beside it. Construction began around 2004, on land bought in pieces for something near $48,000. 2 gates, no windows facing the road. Locally, people called it the Waziristan Haveli. The 3rd floor was stranger still. Its balcony had been fitted with an additional privacy wall about 7 feet high, tall enough to conceal a man of 6'4". Studying the imagery month after month, CIA analysts began to notice a figure walking small circles in the garden below, back and forth, never once stepping beyond the walls. They gave him a code name that admitted everything they did not know. They called him the Pacer. And roughly 3/4 of a mile away, close enough to walk in 20 minutes, stood the Pakistan Military Academy at Kakul, the country's equivalent of West Point. Whatever this house was, it had been built in the shadow of the Pakistani army. That single geographic fact would poison relations between Washington and Islamabad for years, and it remains the part of the story that no official inquiry, American or Pakistani, has ever fully explained. Trace the trail backwards, and it ends in the mountains of Tora Bora, December 2001. American and Allied forces had been Laden cornered in eastern Afghanistan, and then they did not. He walked out through the passes into Pakistan. Whatever chance existed to finish it, there was lost in a battle fought largely by local proxies, while the heavy American infantry never arrived. For the next several years, the trail did not go thin or faint. It went cold. What survived was a name, surfacing in interrogations as early as 2002, Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti. A courier. Detainees contradicted each other about him constantly. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed admitted knowing the man, but insisted he had retired from the work. Abu Faraj al-Libi denied knowing him at all, and the denial itself drew attention because it was so oddly emphatic. Then in 2004, a captured facilitator, Hassan Gul, described him plainly, the man who carried bin Laden's messages. Whether torture produced that lead is still fought over bitterly. The Senate Intelligence Committee's 2014 report concluded the most useful information about the courier came from detainees before or entirely without coercive techniques. The CIA rejected that finding outright. Both sides were arguing over the same small handful of interviews. What nobody disputes is that in 2007, the Americans finally learned the courier's real name, Ibrahim Saeed Ahmed, a Pakistani family from the Swat Valley, born and raised in Kuwait. Then came a mundane break that manhunts actually turn on. In mid-2010, the courier took a call from an old associate whose phone was already being monitored. One lapse in years of discipline, enough to make him findable. Trackers followed him across Pakistan for weeks, patiently, at distance. In August 2010, he drove home. Home was the house with the 18-foot walls. Nobody had a photograph of bin Laden inside it. Nobody had heard his voice. They had a courier, a wall, and a figure walking circles. By September 2010, CIA analysts concluded the compound had been custom-built to hide someone of real significance. But when President Obama asked how confident they were, the answers scattered badly. The lead analyst said 90, perhaps 95%. The agency's deputy director, Michael Morrell, said 60. Others landed near 40. A separate team was assigned to argue the opposite case, to prove bin Laden was not there. They could not. They could not prove he was either. 3 options went onto the table. A-B, 2 strike would certainly work, but flattening the compound reportedly required dozens of 2,000-pound bombs, likely civilian deaths, and no body, no proof, no documents left in the rubble. A drone firing a small precision munition at the pacer in his garden wrist, killing the wrong man permanently, and proving nothing. A joint operation with Pakistan was dismissed almost immediately. Nobody in the room believed the secret would survive the phone call. That left the option with the worst possible downside and the only real upside: American troops on the ground inside an allied country, unannounced, beside its military academy. Robert Gates initially favored the missile strike, warning what a firefight with Pakistani forces would mean. Joe Biden urged more certainty first. Obama himself later described the decision as a 55/45 proposition. The most consequential special operations raid of the century was authorized on something barely better than a coin flip. The final order came on the morning of April 29, 2011. Weather pushed the mission back a day. On May 1st, CIA Director Leon Panetta passed the word to Vice Admiral William McRaven to proceed. Roughly 24 operators from the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, an interpreter, and a Belgian Malinois named Cairo boarded 2 heavily modified Black Hawks at Jalalabad, aircraft whose existence the public had never been told about. The flight ran roughly 120 miles and took about 90 minutes, low and quiet, across a country whose air defenses had deliberately not been worn. Larger Chinooks carried fuel and a reaction force to a staging point inside Pakistan in case everything collapsed. In Washington, it was still afternoon. In a cramped side room off the Situation Room, the senior leadership of the American government sat watching a feed that showed them almost nothing useful. Then the plan broke. As the first Black Hawk moved into a hover inside the compound walls, the air beneath its rotors failed it. Ground temperatures were higher than forecast, the walls trapped the rotor wash, and the aircraft was heavier than in the rehearsals. Pilots call the result vortex ring state. Lift simply vanishes. The helicopter settled hard, its tail striking the compound wall, and came to rest tilted in the animal pen, finished. Nobody was seriously hurt, and nobody stopped. The SEALs climbed out of the wrecked aircraft and went at the walls with explosive charges. The second helicopter, watching the crash, put its men down outside the compound rather than fast roping them onto the roof as rehearsed. Within minutes, the assault had lost its intended shape entirely and was improvising in the dark, half a mile from a Pakistani army installation full of soldiers. Inside, doors were blown and gates were breached, and the team pushed upward through the main house. On the ground floor, the courier's brother Abrar and his wife Bushra were killed. Abu Ahmed Al-Kuwaiti, the courier whose one phone call had ended a 9-year search, was killed in a separate guest house. Of the 5 people who died in that compound, American officials later stated that only he had fired on the assault force. On the 3rd floor landing, bin Laden's son Khalid, still in his early 20s, was shot dead. Beyond him lay a bedroom, and accounts of the next few seconds diverge in ways that matter. In Matt Bissonnette's version, the lead SEAL fired up the stairwell at a figure that peered out, and bin Laden was already mortally wounded when the team entered the room. In Robert O'Neill's version, he came face to face with him and fired twice into his head. Peter Bergen, who examined the competing accounts, found that most SEALs on the mission favored Bissonnette's telling, and noted that O'Neill's claim did not match the after-action reporting. 2 weapons were found in the room, an AK-47 and a pistol, neither fired. Bin Laden was 54, unarmed, wearing a corda with 500 euros and 2 phone numbers sewn into the fabric. He had been prepared to run for years. He never did. The radio call went out, as it was reported afterwards, for God and country, Geronimo. Then, when McCraven pressed for confirmation, Geronimo EKIA, enemy killed in action. It was around 1 a.m, Pakistan time, on May 2nd, 2011. In Washington, nobody cheered. The men on the ground still had to extract from a sovereign country that had, by that point, finally begun to notice them. They spent the remaining minutes stripping the house. Around 100 thumb drives, 10 hard drives, 5 computers, disks, and stacks of paper. The largest intelligence haul ever taken from a single terrorist site. The wrecked Black Hawk was destroyed with explosives, so its classified skin could not be examined. A Chinook came in for the overflow. Roughly 40 minutes after arriving, they were gone. Pakistani fighters got airborne far too late. The body was flown to Afghanistan, identified by DNA, then carried out to the aircraft carrier USS Carl Vinson in the North Arabian Sea. It was washed, wrapped in a white shroud, weighted, and slipped into the water before dawn. There would be no grave, because a grave becomes a place, and a place becomes a shrine. No photographs were ever released. That decision left a vacuum, and vacuums always get filled. In 2015, Seymour Hersh published a counter-narrative that a Pakistani officer had walked into the U.S. embassy chasing the $25 million reward that Pakistan's intelligence service had been holding bin Laden all along, that there was no firefight and no burial at sea. The White House called it baseless, and reporters who tested its sourcing found it thin, a single unnamed retired official carrying most of it. Yet some smaller claims have aged well. The unarmed man, the barely fought fight. Pakistan's own inquiry, the Abbottabad Commission, produced a report in 2013 that satisfied no one. It found no proof the state had knowingly sheltered him, while describing a collective failure so complete it amounted, in its own words, to a national disgrace. Bin Laden had lived in that house for roughly 5 years, with 3 wives and a growing crowd of children, and no official ever knocked on the gate. In February 2012, Pakistan bulldozed the compound flat. 10 years, 2 presidencies, satellites, secret prisons, drones, and a budget nobody has fully counted. And it ended in a decision made on something close to a coin flip, and 40 minutes that the men who were there still described differently. Bin Laden was disciplined enough never to touch a telephone, and that discipline held for a decade. It was not broken by him. It was broken by the one man he trusted to carry his words.